All right, Jeff, so let's get into it. This is the top 10 list of best babyface turns. Remember, this is strictly WWE. And also, just to mention here, going through the list, that this isn't necessarily in any order of what was bigger or better, but so just random order here. So, Jeff, at the top of the list that I took a look at on the blog, I went back to 1984, Jeff, and I was just a young pup back then, and I'd started watching wrestling in 1982. So at this point, I had a couple of years into watching wrestling, so I was very invested, I guess, at that point into all the characters and what was going on. And for me, at this time, and what a fascinating time it was to watch WWF wrestling at that time, because you had that whole transition from the McMahon Senior to the McMahon Junior era. Maybe that's something we'll talk about in a podcast extra at some point. But Sergeant Slaughter turning babyface in 1984. I believe the year was 84. I mean, for me, even to this day, I don't know. I'm not that great at math without an Excel formula in front of me. So I don't know. Was that like 30 years ago or so? To me, that remains one of the best babyface turns in the history of the business. And when you look at the economic impact, the historical impact that the Slaughter turn had on the company at the time, it was pretty big. It's not Hogan level, it's not Austin level, it's not Rock level, but it's pretty big. And what I remember is, I don't know. I always liked Slaughter as a heel. He had just gotten out of the angle with Bob Backlund, if memory serves me correctly. And I remember seeing Slaughter whipping Backlund with the riding crop on TV when Backlund was doing his Harvard Step test. And I actually saw Slaughter and Backlund wrestle twice in Philly. I think I saw him in a Texas death match and a cage match. I'm a little murky on that one, but I know I saw them wrestle twice here in Philly. And I mean, Slaughter was just a really good heel. His promos were great. You watch his promos now on YouTube, and they really resonate if you're a fan of the old school. And just when he went nose to nose with the Iron Sheik, and just as much of a jerk as the Iron Sheik was, it was just awesome. And I don't know what you remember about it. I don't know if you were watching wrestling back then. I know you're younger than me, so probably not. I don't know if you went back and watched it on YouTube. But what do you think when we talk about the Slaughter babyface turn?
Well, at that time, Eric, unfortunately, I was -2.
And you weren't watching it?
I was not watching yet. If I could, I would have, though.
Okay.
But from what I was looking at on YouTube, reading up on Wikipedia, and I feel like this is going to be a common trend with today's show, Eric, and correct me if I'm wrong here on this, but it seems like to me there was a little bit more of an economical factor, more financial factor involved here for WWE to turn Sergeant Slaughter babyface, because obviously this led to various other deals down the line,
Yes.
G.I. Joe deal. And I always remember Sergeant Slaughter from my time as a babyface growing up, and I was devastated when he turned heel there in the early 90s. And as time went on and I learned a little bit more about professional wrestling, I was kind of amazed to hear that he was such a villainous character in his days in the WWF at that time, versus from what I remember him as being this lovable character and a guy who was such a good babyface.
Yeah.
Me growing up on G.I. Joes, this was a guy that, you'd always see at the end of the G.I. Joe episodes and talking to you and all that stuff. And it's amazing to me, because you being a wrestling fan at that time, for me to hear that you thought he was such a good heel versus what I remember him as. I mean, it really tells you how much like a 2 to 3 year difference there is in when these guys go from heel to face turns. But from what I read, it seems like to me that there was a little bit more of a financial angle for WWE versus anything else.
Yeah, and I mean, for Slaughter himself, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, Jeff. I mean, this guy had a career outside of wrestling with this turn, and that's how big it was. It was a turn that resonated with pop culture. And I mean, there's not many turns that you could look back on in history and make that claim. And with Slaughter, I mean, talk about the great promos, not even just in WWF. I mean, anybody listening to this podcast, I would encourage you to go back on YouTube and just type in Sergeant Slaughter promos from NWA, from the NWA Worldwide era. I mean, I know they show him a lot on WWE 24/7. I'm sure they'll be on the network. But, I mean, he was phenomenal. And I think his promos were a little more, how should I say, cartoonish when he came back as a heel in the late 80s, early 90s to the WWE. I think it was what, 90, Jeff? Was that when he came back?
It was about 90, 91, around that time.
Yeah, I think it was a little more cartoonish, which is funny because you're saying like how great he was, then, and I'm saying, man, he was just a shell of what he was. But Yeah, I mean, just taking a guy that was just that much of a jerk and turning him into a babyface, and it was something everybody could get behind. You know, I mean, it's like this is 2013. By the time this makes a website, it might be 2014. You know, I mean, sure, we're patriotic. People, you know, want to see Brazilians want to see the Americans die at USC events, Jeff. But you know, it's not like it was back then. And I mean, people, you know, I mean, they cried when this guy turned and fought for their country in quotation marks.
Yeah, he is he's one of those guys. It's when you brought up the pop culture stuff. There's very few people that I feel like if you're someone who's removed from professional wrestling, if you grew up in the 80s or even in the 90s, there's very few wrestlers that you may remember. But one guy that immediately comes to mind has to be Sergeant Slaughter, basically for what he did for so much in the cross promotion, you know, getting, you know, got kids at my age at that point in time in the late 80s, early 90s to go watch the WWF product at that point. And like I said before, it really it amazes me how much, you know, notoriety he receives as a heel for that time. I mean, do you feel like, from your point of view, Eric, growing up there, that we could consider a guy like Sergeant Slaughter to be one of the most underrated heels of all time?
Absolutely. I mean, his promos were just fantastic. In the ring, he was a hell of a worker. I mean, let's look at this guy's resume here, and we'll move on because we could do a whole podcast on Sergeant Slaughter. At least I could anyway, growing up and watching him. You know, he had two runs with the WWF World Heavyweight Champion. He had 2 runs with Bob Backlund. He had a run, I think it was in 81, and he had the run in 83. He drew that phenomenal house in the NWA with Don Kernodle against Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood, where they reportedly had to turn 5,000 to 10,000 people away at the door. He had a little feud, if I remember correctly, with Bruno Sammartino in the WWF. I mean, this guy was not only a headliner, but this guy put asses in the seats. He was a draw. So yeah, from that point, you know, money wise, what this guy brought to the box office, I think is one of the most underrated of all time.
When Vince sees dollars, Eric, it's clear that he immediately needs to turn someone either heel or face. And clearly, this was the right financial decision for WWE because it led to so many greater pastures for them down the end of the road as Sergeant Slaughter turned in babyface there back in '84.
Yes, and speaking of Vince, and speaking of money, and speaking of 1984, let's talk about what was a bigger babyface turn. And it's a shame that this babyface turn happened in the same year as Slaughter's because, you know, I think Slaughter's would have had even more impact. What's funny about this, Jeff, is when I went back and looked at the WWE.com, they put out a list of top 10 best babyface turns, you know, in WWE history, and neither one of these turns were on the list. Slaughter's turn wasn't on the list, and this one, it wasn't either. And this may have been the biggest of all time. And this was Hulk Hogan turning babyface in 1984. And what most people don't realize is that when Hogan came back to the WWF in 1984, he was returning as a heel. The last time the WWF fans saw him, he was feuding with Andre the Giant. He was feuding with Tony Atlas. He was managed by Freddie Blassie. He was a heel. So when Hulk Hogan came out on television, and I watched this, I wasn't watching WWF television when Hogan was a heel back then. The only Hogan I knew was from watching him in Thunderlips, quite frankly. But when Hogan came back and saved Bob Backlund when Backlund was getting double teamed on television, and Hogan came out with the shirt and everything. Oh, that was a babyface turn. It was one of the more low key babyface turns, but that was a babyface turn. And what I remember back, I remember seeing that. And I read magazines all the time, so I knew what was going on. And I remember thinking, how could Backlund trust this guy? Hogan was a heel, and Backlund did a promo where he said, he trusts him. Hulk Hogan's not managed by Freddie Blassie anymore. And that was the babyface turn. I mean, it's amazing. And when you look back on it, I mean, you could argue Austin, Rock, Hogan, but I mean, to me, I kind of think that this one had the most economic impact of any babyface turn in the history of the WWF, and it's just amazing to me that this one didn't even make the WWF's own top 10 list.
I'm shocked by that. WWF didn't even have Hogan down in '84 turning babyface as one of their top babyface turns.
I didn't see it there. They had the 2002. I think it was 2002 when he turned babyface when he came back to the WWF and split with the NWO. But they did not have this specific one, if I remember correctly. And I probably should go back and look as we're talking now, but I don't remember seeing it there.
there might not have even been a WWF back then if he didn't turn babyface in the early 80s or mid 80s at that point. I've seen a lot of the old Hogan footage with Freddie Blassie, and I'll be honest, I liked him as a heel. I think
Yeah.
it's really cool, him and Blassie together and stuff like that. And obviously everything he did as a face for the next 10 years, 15, or 10, 16 years, whatever he did there for a while, 12 years.
No, Jeff, I want to interrupt you. No, it is not on the list. Hogan's turn at WrestleMania 18 is number 2 on the list, but his turn in 84 is not on the list.
Wow, but yeah, because that turn in WrestleMania 18 led to so many other things down the line.
Exactly.
I'm amazed by that. Obviously, kind of a reverse here, though, Eric, of the Slaughter stuff, because Sergeant Slaughter became a pop culture icon following his babyface turn via G.I. Joe. But Hogan was coming back. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Vince McMahon was really capitalizing on the Rocky stuff, him as Thunder Lips, because at that point, I mean, he was known for being the wrestler in the beginning of the Rocky movies, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was on the Tonight Show. I mean, that was unheard of, for a professional wrestler in that era. He was on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. He was, Vince plugged him. He plunked him from the AWA. I mean, Hogan was wrestling for the AWA, and he was wrestling in New Japan, and he went on a tour of New Japan and sent a telegram to Vern Gagne and said he wasn't coming back. And it's funny because, you and I were recording this on December 29th. And it was just a day or two ago, it might have even been the day after Christmas, which was the anniversary of the show. Let me get this straight. The show that Hulk Hogan was advertised for the AWA that he no-showed to go to the WWF. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It was kind of a reverse effect. That's a great point. Reverse effect here, because Hogan was already a well-known entity. And I guess, Jeff, in retrospect, that's why Vince didn't need to book this big elaborate babyface turn angle, because I guess he just assumed, and rightfully so, that as soon as Hogan walked out, people were going to cheer him anyway.
It was a different type of climate at that point in professional wrestling at that time, Eric. But from your point of view, being a guy that was watching wrestling at that time, do you think it would be possible if Vince were to bring him back as, say, like a babyface and then have him do this in monstrous heel turn? I mean, could that have made as much money as the Hulkamania did?
I don't think so, because they didn't have anybody for him to marry, so to speak, in pro wrestling terms. I guess he could have feuded with Sergeant Slaughter, but at the same time, that dynamic wouldn't have made sense, because Slaughter's fighting for patriotism, unless Hogan, shaved his head and came back as a Russian sympathizer. Maybe. I don't think so. Jimmy Snuka was, and we'll get to Snuka's turn on the list as well. Snuka was a huge babyface at that time. But again, I don't think Hogan as a heel against Snuka. I guess Hogan and Andre, they could have had another run together with Andre as the face. But no, I don't think so. I don't think there was anybody in place at the time that Hogan would have been able to draw money with. And I mean, you had the perfect storm, because you had Hogan coming in and you had Piper coming in, and Piper and Hogan, I mean, they just meshed so well together that without either one of them, I don't know how successful business would have been.
It was a great move by Vince McMahon to turn him face at that point, because obviously torch being passed there from Bruno to Bob Backlund to eventually Hulk Hogan. I mean, Vince was 3 for 3 at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of 3 for 3, how you gonna like this for a segue? 3 plus 3 equals 6. And Jeff Peck, you were a young 6 years old when the Undertaker turned babyface in 1992. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Yes. How do you like that as a segue?
Hey, that's pretty good. If you need a 6-year-old point of view on 1992 Undertaker face turn, I'm your guy, guys.
Beautiful. And that's why you're here today.
Right.
1992. The Undertaker turns babyface, and when I started putting this list together, it was something I really didn't even think about. And then the more and more I started to think about this list and go back into history, it was a pretty big deal, and it was pretty big on where the Undertaker went after this babyface turn, because he was kind of plateauing at this time as a heel. I mean, he came on. That's the one thing that's positive and negative about the way the Undertaker debuted. He debuted on top. He debuted and immediately was thrust into a feud with Hogan. But then after that, there really wasn't a whole lot of room to grow at that point. You got the Ultimate Warrior. He's in and out. Andre the Giant was a heel. And out of the, and basically out of wrestling at this point, wrestling part-time here and there. So Undertaker kind of plateaued at that point. So, here you have the situation with Jake the Snake Roberts and Randy Savage and Elizabeth, which was just an awesome angle at the time. I mean, that moment where Jake's snake bit into Randy Savage's arm is still one of the most memorable moments in pro wrestling history. When Elizabeth ran down the aisle and embraced the Macho Man at WrestleMania, that was another one of those great moments. So this was all part of that pie. And this turn was interesting because here you had The Undertaker stopping Jake Roberts from hitting Miss Elizabeth with a chair. Then Jake Roberts is in Paul Bearer's funeral parlor, and Roberts kind of confronts Paul Bearer on it. At one point, Jake Roberts shuts the casket and shuts Undertaker's hand in the casket, and then beats the crap out of Paul Bearer. I mean, pretty big angle at the time. Unfortunately, the match at WrestleMania wasn't very good between the two of them, but a pretty big deal if you look back in history.
What I like about this is multiple things. One, it was the right move for business at that time for Undertaker to turn face. Two, I felt like I agree with you. The match at WrestleMania between Jake the Snake and Undertaker wasn't good, but I felt like Jake the Snake was the right guy to make Undertaker a babyface. I mean, if there's anybody, any heel that can make the Undertaker into a strong babyface, I felt like it was Jake the Snake Roberts. And what I love most about that angle, Eric, is it kind of came out of nowhere. It's funny from this point of view nowadays when you rewatch that angle of, what was it? Was it Royal Rumble where Jake the Snake attacked Macho Man or something like that? Wasn't it?
That was, yeah, because, well, was it SummerSlam? Well, they had the wedding at SummerSlam, right? So it would have been after SummerSlam.
Some sort of pay-per-view.
Yeah, maybe Survivor Series. I forget when he attacked the Macho Man.
And for whatever reason, I don't know if you felt this way, but it was just like a really corny filming way that they did. Like,
yes,
Taker's arm grabbed, Jake the Snake off of him, and it was a really strange way to do it, but obviously led to bigger and better things. I always liked the Undertaker as a heel. And
Jeff, I think it was Saturday Night's Main Event, not to.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. It was like a January Saturday Night's event, and it was just a really weirdly shot angle that they did there, but. Best for business. I felt like Jake the Snake was the right guy for Undertaker at that point in time, and obviously it led to bigger and better things for the dead man.
Beautiful. And speaking of best for business, let's go to 1997. I'm sure you can talk a lot about this and just remembering this as a wrestling fan. Steve Austin turning babyface in 1997. You talk about Hogan's economical impact on the history of the company. Austin's is right up there, and you can argue whether it was Austin or Hogan's that had the bigger impact. I mean, of course, the economies were different at the time, and that's a whole other discussion, but you could argue that Stone Cold's was the biggest babyface turn in WWE history. And I mean, let's face it, up to that point of the babyface turn, Austin was already a babyface in his own right. I mean, he was wrestling as a heel and he was doing heel things, but people were loving it. People were digging it. People were cheering him. People were booing Bret Hart. People were booing Shawn Michaels when he would wrestle Shawn Michaels. People were digging the Stone Cold character. And the way that the turn happened is fascinating because, the one thing about pro wrestling, Jeff, like it or not, is they love to repeat successful angles. And most of the time they do them to death. See the Montreal Screwjob of 1997. But this one, they have never been able to repeat. And I think that's because the climate was right for it. The guys were right for it. And I don't think you'll ever have a situation where you'll get that same scenario again of a guy, the character of Austin, the character of Bret, and just the way that Austin wound up turning babyface.
Yeah, I completely agree. What I love about this move as well, Eric, is that what happened with Stone Cold Steve Austin is that it was forced by the fans. This wasn't something that Vince McMahon, and I could be completely off base in saying this, but from my point of view as a fan, this wasn't something that WWF had a long-term plan for. Like, it wasn't when 1996 when Austin would win the King of the Ring, we're like, well, by WrestleMania time, Austin will become a face. This is where the fans were like, we like this guy, we're behind him. We're sick and tired of the Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart era. We want to see something different in professional wrestling. In that moment, WrestleMania 13, I don't think it gets any better than that one. That may be the best babyface turn ever based off of what happened. The sharpshooter, the blood, Ken Shamrock calling the match. I loved it. One of my favorite babyface turns, and more importantly, like I said before, it was forced by the fans. It wasn't something WWF had a long-term plan to do eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we'll segue because I think there's a lot we can talk about with Austin. And one day, we'll just have to do a podcast just talking about the Austin babyface turn because, I mean, just where it went and just the historical impact. But
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back, and I think this will be the last time we go back this far. Yeah, well, we got one more '80s turn after this, but this will probably be the earliest one of the the pre Jeff Peck, and this was Jimmy Snuka turning babyface in 1982. And there are a lot of similarities with Snuka and Austin. A lot of similarities if you really want to think about it. And I don't think many people have really examined that aspect of the turn. I mean, how Snuka wound up turning babyface, it's real simple. The fans did it. Snuka was over, and Snuka was doing heelish things. Snuka was destroying Bob Backlund, the hero, the WWF champion at the time. He was with the notorious Captain Lou Albano, who everybody hated, but people loved Snuka. I mean, you can go back on YouTube, and you could watch matches with Snuka and Backlund, specifically from the Philadelphia Spectrum and Madison Square Garden, and you could see fans with signs in the audience in 1982, praising Snuka. They just really liked him. And what really did it for Snuka was the infamous Superfly leap off the top of the cage onto Bob Backlund in Madison Square Garden. He missed, he lost the match, but that is what turned Snuka. I mean, fans just loved seeing that, the spectacular move. I mean, I remember as a fan buying magazines and seeing pictures of that and just being blown away by the pictures, and just like, I was a Snuka fan just by seeing those pictures. I couldn't wait to watch Jimmy Snuka as a wrestling fan at that time. And what happened was, shortly thereafter, he had the big angle where Buddy Rogers, confronted Captain Lou Albano, said he was stealing money from Jimmy Snuka, and then Snuka gets pile driven on the floor with Ray Stevens. But it was, and that's what turned him babyface. But that was the quote unquote angle. But what really turned him babyface was that Superfly leap off the top of the cage and the miss. And you look back at Stone Cold, and what turned him babyface was passing out, that sharpshooter, and just the guts and the gumption that the fans saw in these two guys. I mean, very, very similar.
That's, you hit the nail on the head there, and that's what I love about this angle as well, Eric. Is that Snuka it took a move. It took one single move. The fans wanted to see it, and it's very similar to, as you pointed out, there was Stone Cold Steve Austin, and that's what I love about certain babyface moves. You don't really get to see a lot of it nowadays, as much of an impact historically as it led on there. But Jimmy Snuka being forced to turn face based off the fans, because once again, Vince McMahon saw some dollar signs. You got to give him credit for doing that. But it's that the rebellious wrestling fan that's kind of still in me at 27 years old, is that you love to see the fans go, we like this guy, we want to make him a face. And then it works out for a term that's being thrown around here a lot lately, what's best for business. And I felt like that's exactly what happened here with WWF, as Jimmy Snuka, a huge heel, being, as you pointed out, they're managed by Captain Lou Albano. And then all of a sudden he becomes a face, and to this day, still one of the most beloved baby faces of all time in WWF history.
Yeah, I mean, for me as a fan, he was the first wrestler that I put posters of on the wall in my room. I mean, little did I know that he was allegedly murdering a girlfriend at the time, but that's for another podcast.
That's in passing. Come on.
I mean, we'll talk about that another time. But which it's in hindsight is incredible. But I mean, to me as a fan at the time, Snook was awesome, and I mean that angle with Piper, I mean. And it really blows my mind to this day. And I mean, again, something we could talk about. Maybe you and I think what'll be cool is maybe we'll come back in March and we'll do like a WrestleMania podcast and just talk about WrestleMania. Is that of how minimal Snuka's role was at the first WrestleMania. Now, from what I understand, that Snuka's role was minimal because he was to be used as a backup if Mr. T did not show up. Then Snuka would be inserted into the match with Hogan as his partner. I don't know how true or not true that is, but I've heard that from several people. But when you look back at how huge Snuka was at the time and just see him so minimally used at WrestleMania, and then basically ostracized from the company at that point, pretty incredible.
Well, I'll mention this, and I know we want to get to our next topic here on the babyface list, Eric, is the one thing about Snuka is, and I don't know how you feel about this as a fan growing up in the early 80s, but from what I've read and what I've seen, YouTube's DVDs, I feel like Hulk Hogan's babyface turn eventually overshadowed what Jimmy Snuka could have been for WWF.
Yeah, I mean, Hogan was getting all the pub. I mean, it was obvious when you turn on the television that Hogan was the man, and Snuka was taking the backseat for sure. One of the better babyface turns, and maybe the best that I can remember, Jeff, of this modern era, although it's not so modern anymore, was Batista's babyface turn in 2005. I mean, how awesome was that turn? I mean, you could see that thing simmering months beforehand, but that moment when they did that contract signing after Batista won the Royal Rumble, and and they had that whole debate about whether Batista was going to challenge Triple H or challenge the other WWF champion, and then they have the contract signing where Batista is supposed to not sign the contract, and he does, and the look on Triple H's face and just how angry he gets, and then they brawl, and Batista puts him through the table. I mean, I'm actually getting goosebumps right now talking about it as I think about it. I mean, just talk about the perfect storm for just an amazing babyface turn.
Oh, the stars aligned for this one, and it really, to me, resembles in a very, very small matter right now. And depending when this podcast is out on the CCB, he could be face at that point, knowing my luck.
Yeah,
I really feel like when it comes from a momentum standpoint, it kind of resembles what we may be seeing right now with a current guy like Roman Reigns. People wanted to see Batista to start breaking out, like I want to say, like in that October-November realm of the past year.
Yes.
Then he goes to the Royal Rumble, him and Cena wins the Rumble, and it's just all that momentum is building. And what's kind of funny about the whole Batista babyface turn is as time went on, people kind of forget that Batista was supposed to be the guy over John Cena. John Cena was like in the background. Batista was the focal point. They eventually switched those two guys around. But Batista had so much momentum going for him at that point where I don't even think it's been matched by any wrestler in the last 10 years or so. The amount of momentum from a guy who was kind of a mid-level talent to a huge main event superstar in a matter of months.
Yeah, and a lot of people like to bash on Triple H. But the fact of the matter is this turn would not have worked with somebody as good as Triple H here. And I think that's what's missing from this Roman Reigns turn. And for all I know, Jeff, and again, Roman Reigns could have turned by the time this podcast makes it to the Camel Clutch blog. For all we know, it'll be Triple H as the catalyst for that turn, and Reigns will wind up wrestling Triple H at WrestleMania or something. But I think that's what's missing in that dynamic. But it was Triple H here, and just how awesome he was as a heel over time, and just how how cocky and arrogant he was about just even the idea that Batista would wrestle him at Mania that really made this thing work.
And Triple H was doing his job back then. I mean, you mentioned it, cocky, arrogant. People literally wanted to see Triple H get beaten up at that point in time, that evolution era of WWE wrestling. Batista was the guy to do it. People loved to see it. The reaction he got when he gave the thumbs down is an amazing reaction, including the power bomb through the table. People loved it. And I think that's where that famous line, because I've been seeing it a lot lately on the promos being released for Batista's return, where Jim Ross had screamed, "The beast has been unleashed." A lot of perfect alignment going on at that point, from the heel to the announcing to the right guy, and it's something that's completely lost in professional wrestling nowadays.
Yeah, and let's go to the next angle here in the interest of time. Not an angle that had big economic impact per se, but an angle that's very memorable for its time period. And you probably remember this pretty well as a young wrestling fan at this time. And that was Lex Luger going on the Intrepid and body slamming Yokozuna.
I sure do. I mean, it was a huge, Hogan had left at that point. WWF needed a hero, and it was Lex Luger. One of my favorite things about that Intrepid, that whole moment with Yokozuna, though, is when you look at it, Eric, is when he is landing his plane. When the helicopter is landing, people are chanting Hogan.
Wow.
Have you ever seen that clip?
I've seen it, but I've never taken note of that. I'm going to watch that when we're done the podcast today.
Yeah, you got to check it out, Eric. He is landing the plane, or someone is landing the helicopter, and people are chanting Hogan, Hogan, thinking Hogan's coming back to WWF at that point, because that was post King of the Ring.
Yeah.
Lex Luger becomes a guy, narcissist into the All-American, and that was a huge babyface turn.
Yeah, good stuff. And you touched on it just a few moments ago about Cena and Batista, but how about Cena's babyface turn in 2003? It certainly wasn't as electric as Batista's. I mean, really, what it was is Paul Heyman coming out with Team Lesnar right before Survivor Series, telling John Cena he's going to be on the team. Cena telling Heyman that nobody tells him what to do. He's attacked by A-Train and then beaten down by the team, including Lesnar. Of course, Cena would get his revenge on Lesnar 9 years later. But again, in terms of economic impact, not many that are much bigger.
No, I don't think they had high hopes for Cena at that point, which is really strange to say. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the Batista stuff. Is John Cena was a background player to Batista at that point in time in 05. 03, you know, I really don't feel like fans were clamoring for a John Cena face turn at that point. People loved him as a heel. I remember he did that stuff with
Yep.
Bull Buchanan as
Yep.
B2. People really loving what he was doing, his promos. And it's not a bad thing to have a cool heel every once in a while, and he was that cool heel. And I up until you sent me the list a couple days ago, I had to go back and go, well, what did Cena turn face with? It
Yeah.
was it the Halloween episode? And it's that Team Lesnar,
Yeah.
A-Train beating him down, and it's one of those moments that people really forget about, but it is a huge babyface turn.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We'll take our final trip into the 80s and take a look at Roddy Piper turning babyface in 1986. And I'll speak on this for a moment in that, again, Piper was just such an awesome heel that it got to the point that he was too awesome that fans started cheering him. By this point, in 1986, I was starting to hit those fun teenage years and in my adolescence. And at this point, as a fan, I was tired of Hulk Hogan. I was tired of those milk face and milk toast and lollipop baby faces that Jerry Jarrett likes to refer to them as. I wanted something with a little more edge. I wanted something a little more fun, and Roddy Piper was it. And I loved him, even when he was a heel, even when he was kicking Cyndi Lauper. I just really liked what he was doing. I was a big fan, and Piper, it was a really odd angle because Piper just goes away for a while. All of a sudden, you have Adrian Adonis, who's now cross-dressing. And for WWF fans like me that had been watching for years, we all knew Adrian Adonis. He'd been in and out of the company since, the early 80s. Now he's back. He's heavy. He's cross-dressing. And they've turned this Piper's Pit segment into the flower shop. Cowboy Bob Orton is now wearing a pink hat. And then Piper comes back one day, and he's just like, what the F? What happened? And, the guys all beat down Piper, and then Piper comes back on the same show later with a crutch, limping with a bat on his hand, basically saying that he's going to kick some ass, that he's here to kick some ass, and the fans loved it. It was awesome. It certainly didn't have the same economic impact that Hogan or Austin had or Cena. I mean, Piper's a legend, but let's call it as it is. I mean, they made sure that when Piper turned babyface, he was number 2, that he wasn't going to be pushed any harder than Hogan, and it showed. But as far as babyface turns, I think it's one of the biggest in history.
One of the things that I could compare him to for modern times, because obviously 86, that's when the year I was born, was a huge year in the world of professional wrestling.
Of course.
Roddy Piper was, for me, the way I can compare it is like CM Punk in 2011, when fans wanted to see Punk turn face. And I kind of feel like, though, the hardcore fans love a heel Roddy Piper. They loved a heel CM Punk. And when those two guys both turned face, I mean, you pointed it out that he would clearly be number 2 behind Hulk Hogan, Eric. And for CM Punk, he would clearly be number 2 behind John Cena. And I almost wonder at times when that happens, is it almost better to keep those guys as a heel versus a babyface? Because, Hogan needed Piper. You can make a case that Cena needed Punk. And for me, I felt like Piper was always better as a heel, obviously, but to be that cool babyface, he's still a beloved character, one of my most favorite wrestlers of all time. So I loved, him being a quote unquote good guy, but I kind of felt like at that point in time, I wonder if it was almost best suited for him to stay as a heel versus what they eventually did with him being the babyface.
Yeah, definitely. And Piper, incidentally, should be pointed out, and I've pointed this out in a blog that I did on Wrestling's Greatest Feuds with him and Hogan, one of the only heels that I can ever remember that never had to do the favor in the end for the babyface.
Wow, that's a great point. I never really thought about that.
Yep. Always in the end, the babyface always prevails, but not in Piper and Hogan's case.
No, not at all. That's a fantastic point. I think that's probably one of the only times you ever seen that.
Yeah, I mean, when I can't think of a different time. I can't think of another time when that happened.
No, I can't either. Right off the top of my head, nothing right now. That would be probably the one and only time.
Yep. All right, and let's wrap this up with Randy Savage turning babyface in 1991. Now, of course, this wasn't Savage's first go-around as a babyface. He was a babyface going into WrestleMania 4, but not a real big angle to solidify the turn. It was just more, I guess, the fans pushing it in that direction. But this one was huge. I mean, you had Miss Elizabeth in one of the most emotional moments in wrestling history. I mean, Jeff, you were a young pup at this time, and it's okay, Jeff, to admit that you had tears in your eyes when Randy Savage and Elizabeth hugged in the center of the ring.
I mean, there could have been some dust in the room. I might have allergies that day, but it was clearly one of the best wrestling moments of all time in it. And for whatever reason, Eric, I don't know how you feel about this, but that was one of those moments that transcended with every wrestling fan, whether you were male,
Yes.
female, child, elderly person. If you watch wrestling for 50 years or 5 months, that was a moment that everybody was invested in, and clearly, without a doubt, one of the best, if not the best, babyface turn ever.
Okay, Jeff, we ran through my list of top 10 in the final couple of minutes that we have remaining. Is there anything that didn't make the list that you thought should belong here? Is there anything outside of the WWE that just resonates with you that you got to bring it up? Any commentary you have on what didn't make the list?
I've got three face turns that were all WWE, WWF, depending on its period of time there, that I felt like were great baby face turns. One of the ones, it reminds me of the Jimmy Snuka stuff, was 1997, Mankind's turn.
Yes, yes, that would have been on the top 15 list for sure.
Yeah, when Mankind there, it was 96 or 97. I always forget there because it was that Austin King of the Ring. When they had Mankind and Triple H there at the King of the Ring, the cage match at SummerSlam that year, I thought that was a great face turn because it took such a quote-unquote deranged character and made him into a beloved babyface.
Yes, absolutely.
And another one I've got in, and it was very short-lived in the context of terms here, but 2002, Triple H returning as a babyface. You mentioned earlier on in 2005 how hated he was by fans. Well, he was just as hated from like 98 to 2001 when he went out with the quadriceps injury, and he comes back to Madison Square Garden and gets a huge ovation from the fans. I thought that was a huge babyface moment as well.
Yeah, when I threw this out on Twitter when I was first starting to get the list together, that was a turn that kept being brought up. And again, like Mankind, if I was doing top 15, that would have been on there. I guess it was kind of hard for me to put into words in a blog exactly what the face turn was. It was really just him being hyped, for returning and just walking out there. I mean, it's not like he helped anybody. If I remember right, it's not like he helped anybody that was in trouble. It's not like he, fired his manager. It was just him coming out there and the fans kind of officially putting that stamp of babyface on him.
Yeah, hey, we like you. Welcome back.
Yes.
We missed you with a huge ovation in MSG. And finally, in 1998, when the corporation turned on The Rock, obviously The Rock, was a huge babyface until he returned again in 2003 in between those movie roles there when he was a great heel against Stone Cold Steve Austin going into WrestleMania 19. But The Rock at that point, I mean, fans were clamoring for him to be a face for 5 months prior to that point. He was a face for a short period of time there heading into that 1998 Survivor Series, and then, it was 99 is when the corporation turned on him, and he became a babyface, and then kind of became like a 1A, 1B to Stone Cold Steve Austin at that point. When Austin went down with injury, Rock stepped up as the huge babyface, so I felt like 1999, The Rock turning face as well.
Yeah, that was awesome. If you could remind me, I tried going back and looking at this. Was it when Rock beat up Vince? Was that his official turn, or didn't Shane do something to him too? Like what was the official turn?
It was literally the Raw after WrestleMania 15.
Okay.
Austin and Rock went at it there. And the corporate, it was something like Shane McMahon was bashing The Rock for not winning the championship, and Triple H was part of the corporation at that point. And no, it was post Backlash. I'm sorry, it was the Raw after Backlash. So they had the rematch from WrestleMania 15 between Rock and Austin, and Triple H got involved. Rock hit Triple H. And then he hit Shane McMahon, and then he hit China as well, and that's when the corporation beat down The Rock. And after that, it was like The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin were tagging for a little bit. And then Vince McMahon had that quasi face turn for a little bit before being revealed as the person behind the ministry,
yes,
the corporate ministry at that point. So that was when The Rock turned face, was 1999 after the Backlash pay-per-view.
Well, Jeff, this was a lot of fun. Really appreciate your time. You can plug away if there's anything out there you'd like the fans to know about you.
Sure. I'm on the Bauer Show Monday through Friday from 3 to 7 on 97.9 ESPN in Hartford and ESPN Radio 1300. You can listen online, 979ESPN.com. And as Eric mentioned before, the Still Real to Us Show podcast, it's a wrestling podcast for about an hour or so over at WrestleChat.net, WheelhouseRadio.com, and TWFnews.com. We release it every Thursday. And more importantly, my pleasure for being here, Eric. I really appreciate you sending the invite. I had a lot of fun talking baby faces with you, and we'll love to do it again very soon.
Yeah, definitely. We gotta do this again. Always a good time talking to you. Always love reuniting the original Still Real to Us team. And mentioned a couple of things throughout the podcast here, maybe taking a look at some WrestleManias, things like that. So yeah, we'll definitely get together in the near future and do some more of these.
Absolutely, man. I'm down. Let's do it.
All right, thanks again. And yeah, just follow us on the Camel Clutch blog. There are plenty of links up there to follow the podcast on iTunes. You can download it on the YouTube channel and all that fun stuff. And if there are any turns that I missed on the list or that Jeff and I missed, or there's anything that you want to add to what Jeff and I had to say, please leave some comments at the end of the podcast here on the blog. And with that, we'll see you next time on the CCB Extra. Be extra. Be extra. Be extra. Be extra.